You are listening to Vox Arcanum, occult talk radio, shining light on all things esoteric. Find us online at facebook.com/Vox Arcanum Radio. Thank you for tuning in to Vox Arcanum. This is your host, Valen Calhoun, for the week of September 28th, 2015. This week, I wanted to talk a bit about the mythology of the psychopomp. For those who don't know, a psychopomp is an entity described in countless cultures that accompanies the soul safely to the afterlife. It's a very common theme that is found throughout many religious beliefs. For instance, the archangel Azrael is known in both Christian and Jewish mythology as the angel of death, while in Islam he is said to escort every single human soul to Allah. While in Norse tales we learn of Freya and her Valkyries, which fly amidst the battlefields, choosing which slain warriors will be brought to Valhalla. Freya and even Odin himself are sometimes said to be escorts of the deceased. In Greek mythology, we have Hermes, known to the Romans as Mercury. We also have Charon and Thanatos. The Aztecs believed in Xochitl, the god of lightning and death, who would occasionally escort the dead to Mictlan, their afterlife. Anubis, who was later replaced by Osiris, was the Egyptian personification of the psychopomp and would guide souls on their journey to Nuat, the Egyptian underworld. While there are many similarities between cultures regarding psychopomps, they are not always necessarily anthropomorphic. For instance, the Inuit people believed that the aurora borealis lights were actually torches, lit each night by spirits to help guide the dead to the other world. Indigenous Australians believed that dolphins escorted the souls of the dead across the water and into the afterlife, and it is believed that in prehistoric times, bees were thought of as a guide after death, as they are found carved on many burial stones and mounds. In many stories, psychopomps are endowed with abilities that go beyond simply escorting the dead. For instance, the word itself, Valkyrie, literally translates to chooser of the slain, implying that they are active decision-makers instead of mindless drones. It was believed that the Valkyries not only chose which heroes would gain entrance into Valhalla, but that they even had the ability to choose who would die in battle. They were said to use malicious magic to ensure that their preferences were executed. There seems to be a common thread of duality running through the mythology of the psychopomp. They are sometimes feared and sometimes welcomed, but they are always honored. Anubis perfectly illustrates this dichotomy. Being one of the eldest Egyptian deities, he was honored as a guardian and protector of the dead, while at the same time he evoked enough fear into the living that funerary traditions were shaped around his desires. Ancient Egyptians believed that adding sweet-smelling herbs and plants to the embalmed would help the deceased in the afterlife, as Anubis would sniff the mummy, and only the purest would move forward into paradise. Before a soul could begin its journey into the underworld, a ceremony called the opening of the mouth had to occur. Anubis was invoked during this ritual when a high priest, wearing a mask of his likeness, sprinkled water upon the coffin. Prayers were made to open the mouth, eyes, and ears, and in effect reanimate the corpse for the journey to come. Anubis was also crucial in the weighing of the heart ceremony, in which the mummy was brought into the hall of the dead, where the heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of justice. If your heart was lighter than the feather, you would be granted life everlasting. However, if it was heavier, you were devoured by the crocodile-headed demon Amit, the destroyer. These rituals serve to highlight the importance of the psychopomp as not only a key to the afterlife, but also a kind of redeemer of man. Another personification of this can be seen in the stories of Hermes, messenger of the gods. Hermes was also known as the slayer of Argos. He was honored as a very masculine deity, and any affront to his masculinity typically ended in tragedy for the offender. He was tasked by Zeus to lead the souls of mortals to Hades, and given the power to enter and manipulate dreams. Despite his notorious temper and association with the dead, Hermes was held in high esteem by the world of men and gods alike. He was said to be light-hearted, witty, and kind, and is credited for the creation of the first tuned musical instrument. He was also responsible for inventing the alphabet and many games of chance, and because he often helped mortals, was invoked regularly for good luck. Like Anubis, Hermes represents the duality of a god that is honored and feared, and whose task is regarded as a necessary evil. It then becomes apparent that the belief in a guide who helps navigate the afterlife is a common human trait, and therefore worth deeper investigation. Modern-day accounts of psychopomps are no less frequent than in the past. Almost all stories of near-death experiences include themes of loved ones, angels, or religious figures beckoning the soul to join them in the afterlife. Many people who have died and come back report having seen angelic figures surrounding them, and they often communicate telepathically. They typically make reference to a feeling of comfort and safety in the presence of these beings, and they also have a deep urge to return to them. The dying are known to call out to unseen figures, almost always family members that have died previously. It's an endearing phenomenon, and it tends to bring a sense of peace to the dying and living alike. So what exactly is happening here? According to Carl Jung, the symbology of the psychopomp represented a projection of the inner self onto an outer figure. This mechanism, in effect, aids the mind in accepting the inevitability of death. To some, this statement would seem to devalue the spiritual experience of meeting your guide. However, I personally find that it adds depth to the process, and it gives you the opportunity to shape your own experience. In essence, you can create your own psychopomp. For those who are familiar with the creation of thought forms, this should come as an obvious realization. For those who are not, I'll elaborate. Thought forms, simply put, are mental constructs, but unlike memes or ideas, thought forms actually take on the attributes imbued by their creator, and then they serve to function autonomously. Thought forms can be created intentionally or by accident. I'll use an example. Jesus Christ. There's been no confirmed evidence of his existence. His entire personality, however, has been constructed and reinforced by countless individuals and groups. Over time, the thought form of Jesus has become a nearly tangible construct. Think of prayer, meditation, and recitation as nourishment for thought forms, to the extent that a non-existent man has become a quite powerful astral entity. When creating thought forms, repetition is key. To start off, it's best to attempt a construct that requires little physical detail, who can focus on one or two simple tasks. This creation can take on any form of your choosing and can be programmed to perform actions that aid you in your daily life. You will want to begin by mentally creating its shape and form, so get yourself into a meditative state and imagine creating your thought form. You want to slowly add details one at a time until you are comfortable with the results. You're going to want to repeat this process over the next month. It may be necessary to write down specifics about your entity, and I find it helps to keep a journal for this purpose alone. After about a month of daily meditation, you'll be ready to add a personality to your thought form. Remember that at this point, you're going to want to decide what type of characteristics would best suit your thought form's tasks. If you're creating an entity that is going to be a protector, you'll want to be sure that it has its own defenses and methods of self-preservation. No detail is too small at this stage. You'll want to ask yourself things like, where does this entity live? What does it feed off of? What abilities does it possess? The more detail you can add, really, the better. It helps to create a ritual for summoning, tasking, or dismissing your thought form as well. You can create a symbol representative of its task as well as its name. After the initial creation, you're ready to start assigning tasks to your thought form. Remember that like any living being, your creation is going to require energy to thrive, so you're going to want to revisit it to kind of enforce what you've already created. It's very important that you set aside time to reinforce your intent. There's no set formula for how long this process will take, but you'll start to notice during meditation that the thought form begins to act more independently. Some people will notice a change in its vibrancy. Personally, my thought forms will often glow more brightly when they are fully programmed. This process is all about trial and error. What works for one individual may not be the best method for you, so make sure to try different approaches and keep a log of whatever you attempt. After working with thought forms regularly, you'll start to notice that there's subtle nuances and quirks that by adding can really add depth to your creations. It is the same exact technique you'll be using to create your own psychopomp. You may wish to model your creation after an already existing deity, so make sure to do your research and thoroughly look through details. Try not to rush the process. The more time you spend dedicated to its development, the more likely you are to be successful. And with a little practice, absolutely anyone can create their own thought form. Children seem to have a natural ability to do this on a day-to-day basis. Mastering this skill is really simply a matter of practice. I haven't found much literature on the subject except for one book by an Annie Besant that seems to sum the process up nicely. It's aptly titled Thought Forms and was written in the 1800s, but the techniques included are still very useful for today. So I task each one of my listeners to go ahead and create their own thought form. And if you'd like, email your experiences to voxarcanumradio@yahoo.com and we'll revisit the subject again on a later date. Thank you for listening to Vox Arcanum Radio. If you've enjoyed this broadcast, make sure to subscribe on YouTube and follow us at facebook.com/Vox Arcanum Radio.